Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the MMA Pick'ems podcast. And this episode will be breaking down the full card for UFC Fight Night Cannonier versus Gastelum. Last week, I only broke down half the card. And, this week, I'm going to do the full card here. It's probably going to be completely out of order because all I really did here was, I added the fights that I didn't break down last week and then just added last week's episode and edit it towards the end of this one, if that makes sense. So basically, the first half of this episode will be pretty much all new stuff, and then the second half will be pretty much last week's episode because I don't think any of my reads have changed. The lines have come out, and any of the lines that I felt were inaccurate, I already bet. But, I do just want to apologize really quickly in advance since the card is going to be just completely out of order. Anyways, with that out of the way, we do have to do our recap here of the previous event since, I wasn't able to do that last week. So let's get right into it. All right. So we started off the card a little bit slow for this event. So I guess we'll start with one of our parlays that busted here. I had Angela Hill, Tisha Torres. Fight goes to a decision, parlayed with Kowalkiewicz and Penne to decision. So obviously, the Penne-Kowalkiewicz fight ended inside the distance, and, obviously that caught me by surprise there. I was expecting this fight to be a back-and-forth, pitter-patter sort of striking affair, but Kowalkiewicz decides to follow Penne into her guard and get submitted there. A little bit questionable in terms of fight IQ. I think she could have won a pretty sound decision there, but of course she decides to follow her into the guard and just get armbarred. So, not too much more to say there. Probably shouldn't have put 2.5 units there, but, it's just one of those fights where I felt, most of the time it would go to a decision, but, it just didn't happen in that scenario. And then moving along, I had a 1/4 of a unit on Cape to win in round 2. So, I actually had a feeling that Cape would get the knockout, in general. I actually tweeted about that. Follow me on Twitter, guys. And, my reasoning for that was I just felt that Cape was just a much higher level fighter there. The guy is just, I think, much more technical. He's got way more experience fighting the higher level guys. And instead of just taking the knockout prop, which was only, I think, like plus 160, I wanted to play the round prop. So, obviously, Cape is live for the knockout whenever, but I just figured the second round in particular because, for one, he's got a number of round 2 knockouts on his record, and one, I just felt that maybe in that first round, Osborne would start off, strong, and Cape would look to maybe get his reads in that first round, not get too much offense off, and then once he's gotten the read on Osborne, he would be able to find the opening and knock him out in that second round. But, as it turns out, he was able to make his reads and make his adjustments early enough in the fight to knock him out late in that first round. And, I'm not going to say whether or not that stoppage was early or not, but, had, I don't remember who the ref was, let them continue to fight. I do think that Osborne would have gotten knocked out in the second round. So, at the end of the day, it was just really a little sprinkle on that second round prop. Not something I'm too upset about, but, I do feel that was a pretty live outcome. And then moving along, I also had half a unit on Menefield to win in round 1. So, Menefield typically is a first round knockout or bust sort of guy. And for the first time ever, we've seen him win a decision. And, this is on a card where up until that point, there've just been finish after finish. And then when it gets to Menefield, the guy wins a pretty low paced decision. And I feel he definitely played it a bit safe that fight, but, it did look like Herman was able to land some pretty clean ones on him, and Menefield at that point was just content to land leg kicks and, just coast to a decision and not, put himself in too much danger. So, that was only a half unit stab, and at plus 225 for Menefield, who historically has been a first round finisher, I don't think is really all that bad. Who would have thought that Menefield would just coast to a 3-round decision? Anyways, moving along, I did also have half a unit on Bobby Green by decision. And, I did mention in the previous podcast that the line did feel wide. This was a pretty decent step up in competition for Fiziev. And, Bobby Green's a pretty solid defensive striker. And, the guy's got pretty slick boxing himself. So, ultimately this was just a value play here. I felt that there was solid value on green, and then, green at plus 400, I think was, ultimately pretty good value. Really, the by decision prop was just to kind of minimize the risk a bit, because at the end of the day, I did feel that Fiziev was going to win, but, plus 400 on Bobby Green is a little egregious, so I just took a small stab there. So up to this point, I'm down about like 3.5 units, maybe a little bit more, but fortunately was able to turn this around, and this is where a lot of the straight picks really came through. So Song Yadong, Casey Kenny had a small 1.05 unit stab on Song Yadong, and that fight kind of played out the way I expected it to. Yadong was winning the majority of the striking exchanges. Like I said, the guy's got very slick striking. He was able to land the much cleaner, harder shots on Kenny, and that fight somehow ended up being a split decision, which, a little egregious there. I don't think that Kenny won more than one round. Honestly, I had Song winning all 3 rounds. I don't know how the judges scored, 2 of those rounds for Kenny, but, it is what it is. But yeah, that fight kind of just played out the way I expected it to. And, like I said, Kenny, while he does have the wrestling in his back pocket, he's definitely not on the same level as some of the wrestlers that Song Yadong has fought, and Song was able to stuff those takedowns pretty easily, keep the fight standing, and win a pretty comfortable decision there on the feet. And then in the next fight, I had Tecia Torres to win over Angela Hill. Initially, I had 1.5 units on that fight, and then ended up putting another 1.5 units after I recorded the podcast, because I had kind of convinced myself, as I was recording, that Tecia Torres should probably be a bigger favorite in there. And she absolutely did look like a minus like 200 favorite in there. And my initial read for that fight was that I thought it'd be a pretty close fight, on the feet, but what really make the difference was the grappling of Torres. I didn't expect Torres to just go in there and Khabib Hill or even replicate her performance from the first fight. I just figured that she'd come in with a game plan to take the fight to the ground, to really cap off a round. I didn't expect Torres to just completely dominate Hill on the feet. I didn't think that she'd be able to just, touch Hill up at will, but it looked like she was just the much quicker fighter in there. And, am I completely caught off guard by that? Not exactly, because, while I didn't mention it in the previous in the breakdown, one of the factors for, fading Hill was the fact that she is much older, and, she really showed it that fight. I think like in that first, or after that first grappling exchange early in the fight where, they had a bit of clinch work going on there early, it looked like Hill just significantly slowed down. And that's always been a bit of an issue with Hill, is that, her cardio isn't great. And, I think at like 36, 37, it's definitely not getting any better. And I don't think my read was completely off either, because I believe either in the second or third round, Torres was able to cap off the round with a very, strong takedown, hold Angela Hill down and just kind of flurry on her, which I expected her to do. Torres has historically been a very good round finisher. And what I mean by that is she is someone that will look to really put a stamp on the fight by either ending with like a flurry or ending the round with a bit of control time with, either some, cage pushing or just looking to get the fight to the ground and, just getting a bit of control time. Weirdly enough, though, the script kind of got flipped in this fight, where Hill was actually the one looking for some of the grappling exchanges, and Hill actually, I think, ended the first and the second round on top, which didn't really expect that, but ultimately Torres did come away with the victory. And I think I spent way too much time recapping this fight, so we got to move on. Michael Chiesa, Vicente Luque, put a unit on Chiesa, expected him to really get his grappling going, get a lot of control time. Obviously, kind of underestimated the jiu-jitsu of Luque there. And, I did say in the breakdown that Luque has legit, jiu-jitsu, and that it'd be tough for Chiesa to submit him. Although I did also say that Chiesa's a very big, strong guy in there. And, the guy is very good at kind of just muscling submissions. And early in that fight, it looked like he might have been able to pull off that neck crank, but Vicente Luque is not a bitch. He's not going to tap to a neck crank. And, he was eventually able to reverse Chiesa there and pull off a submission of his own. Very crazy back and forth fight while it lasted. And ultimately, I don't think it's a terrible bet. I just felt that, when I took the money line play for Chiesa, that he would be live for the decision if, he prioritized control a little bit more over submission. And, he decided to go for the submission early, wanted to make a statement, but, got a little overzealous, and Luque was able to kind of flip the script on him there. So, yeah, good on Luque there. The guy's definitely looking like a legit contender. And moving along, finally, we have Cyril Gane in. I had him in a parlay, and I also took Gane Gane inside the distance. So, I completely forgot about the Johnny Munoz-Jamie Simmons fight. I had Munoz and Gane in a parlay, 3.5 units. Not too much to say about the Munoz fight. I mean, Jamie Simmons just not UFC caliber. Munoz was able to make quick work of him, find the submission like I had predicted him to. Easy cash on that leg. And then Cyril Gane, Derek Lewis, just absolute domination in there. And, I remember last week I had kind of gone between the inside the distance prop and then the decision prop for Gane. But, this was a fight I dug a little deeper in. And, even though Gane has historically been a decision guy, Lewis has been finished in all of his losses. So, something's going to have to give. And I decided to go with Gane inside the distance because even though Gane doesn't have, crazy knockout power, I just felt that over the course of 5 rounds, Gane was likely just going to be able to touch up Lewis. And, the fights that I've seen Lewis lose, not very encouraging. The guy pretty much gets hurt in all of those fights. And if he's going to take that many unanswered shots from Gane, then I definitely think that he'd fold. And that's kind of what happened. He wasn't able to get any sort of offense off. And Gane was pretty much just able to tee off on Lewis there and eventually get the finish. So that prop plus the parlay pretty much put me ahead to win on the night, and did come away with plus 3.17 units on the night. So, pretty solid night, a pretty good bounce back night after 2 very, very bad events. Anyways, that'll do it for this recap. Another pretty long-winded one, but I always leave timestamps in there if anyone wants to skip ahead. So, let's get right into this card. We got a pretty big card here, so let's get right into it. And in the next fight, we have Martinez versus Trevin Jones. And this is a fight that just got put together. I don't know what happened with Strader, but he dropped out of that fight. And so Trevin Jones is coming in short notice. I'm sure he'll still be in great shape since Jones was initially scheduled to fight Ronnie Lawrence a couple weeks ago. And obviously that fight didn't happen. So Trevin Jones has got another opportunity to fight here. As far as how the fight is lined, I was only able to find one book with the line for this fight. And right now we have Trevin Jones at minus 176 and Martinez at plus 151. And, I am sure this is probably going to fluctuate a bit as we get closer to fight week. But as it stands, this is what we have. But starting with Martinez first. So the guy appears to be primarily a striker. He has got pretty good movement on the feet. Does seem to have some pretty explosive striking, pretty good timing and accuracy. From what I have seen, it looks like, he might be a bit of a counter striker, although I'm not 100% sure. With the footage I've seen, it's not very clear. A lot of it is, just ringside, phone quality footage. I mean, it's not too bad or anything. It's just hard to see some of the action clearly. But anyways, it does seem like the guy's got some power, and he does have a ton of early stoppages on the regional scene. He's definitely got some power in his hands. As far as his striking defense, he does seem a little hittable, and, he's not exactly high volume or anything. But, at the end of the day, he does seem to have some finishing upside. And with his opponent, Trevin Jones, the guy's definitely got finishing upside as well. I said it before, and I'll say it again. The guy's an absolute tank, and I'm talking about his durability and his physique. The guy was able to take just massive punishment from Valiev and was able to rally in that second round to get the finish. And, aside from that, the guy's just got very explosive striking. The guy's apparently got the touch of death as well. I mean, he was able to finish Batista and Valiev, both guys who have never been finished before prior to fighting Jones. On top of that, he does seem to have a little bit of offensive grappling he could go to. Does seem to actually have his base in jiu-jitsu as well. So the guy seems to be a pretty well-rounded fighter. The only issue that I kind of have with him is probably the volume. And like I've said before, with guys that have this much power and this much finishing upside, they tend to not be the biggest volume strikers. But, it doesn't matter too much, since if they are able to land, they can put you out. But obviously the flip side of this is if they aren't able to put you out, it's going to be a pretty close fight, and it's going to be tough for them to win minutes during the fight. And, I mentioned this in my previous breakdown for Jones, and so I'll mention it again here. But, if you look at the guy's record, he's got, I believe, 3 split decision losses and 3 split decision wins. So I think that's just really indicative of his style. If he's not able to get the finish, it's going to be a really close fight. And I think that applies to this matchup as well. I said it, in his previous matchup against Lawrence, but, I'll mention it again for this fight here. I think that this is likely going to be a striking affair. Both guys, well, I think Jones is definitely the more well-rounded fighter. Martinez appears to primarily be a striker. I haven't really seen his fights go to the ground, so for the sake of this breakdown, I'll just call him a striker. But with Jones, while he does have a lot of power, I think he does have some grappling upside. Now, as far as the striking goes for this matchup, I think it's going to be a pretty close affair. I mean, if Jones gets the knockout, obviously, he's going to look like a massive favorite in hindsight. But if he doesn't, I think it's going to be a pretty close affair. Both guys, I do think, have finishing upside. So while Jones can definitely catch Martinez, I do think that Martinez will have opportunities to find openings as well. However, I do have to favor Jones a little bit more, just because he does have a little bit of that UFC experience. He's been in there with some, really good strikers in Valiev and Batista. Although, with the Valiev fight, obviously he was just getting destroyed in that first round, but was able to come back. And against Batista, that was actually a pretty close fight up until he caught him. So, I think Jones has given a pretty good account of himself in the UFC so far, whereas Martinez, he's primarily only finished, pretty low-level guys on the regional scene. And, the one time he got a slight step up in competition against Rodriguez, he got finished. And, even before Rodriguez landed that triangle choke on Martinez, Rodriguez was actually landing some pretty clean shots against Martinez. And if Martinez is not careful and he's leaving openings like that against Rodriguez, then I definitely feel that Jones can definitely catch Martinez coming in. So for that reason, I am going to side with Jones here. So aside from the striking, I do feel that Jones might be the better grappler in this situation. And should the fight hit the ground, I do maybe slightly lean him a little bit more. And as far as betting tips go, I just feel the line might be a little bit wide here. Jones at minus 176, maybe just a little bit. But at the end of the day, I do favor him to win. I think he's just a little bit better everywhere. But, there's just such a limited sample size and fights from Martinez that I've seen that it's really hard to say if he's truly UFC caliber or not. And at the end of the day, with that much finishing upside, it's hard to make him that big of a dog. But, ultimately, I am going to side with Jones here. I don't think I'll bet this fight, though. So in what I believe is the first fight of the night, at least according to Tapology here, we have Abdul Razak Alhassan versus Antônio Braga Neto. And Alhassan's going to be the minus 131 favorite. Comeback on Braga Neto is plus 111. And, we're getting the return of Abdul Razak Alhassan here against Braga Neto, who's, coming off of like a 3-4 year layoff. The guy is extremely inactive. The last fight for Braga Neto was last UFC fight was back in 2017, late 2017 against Trevin Giles. And then before that, the guy, fought Clint Hester back in 2014. So the guy has got like 2 fights in the last 7 years. I don't know what the deal is with this guy, but he's got just massive gaps in his MMA career. He is a submission specialist, and, he has competed in jiu-jitsu events. But, as far as MMA goes, he's only got 12 fights, and only 3 UFC fights so far. 2-1 in the UFC. Does have a knee bar win over Anthony Smith way back in the day, but since then has yet to win an MMA fight. But yeah, not too much else to say about this guy. The guy, his striking isn't that great. Again, he is primarily a grappler. He is very aggressive with the submission attempts, and he will look to get this fight to the ground as soon as possible. And with how long of a layoff he's taken, we just don't really know how he's going to look. I assume he's probably going to be in pretty decent shape. He was scheduled to fight Deron Win back in late 2020. That fight fell through, but he is still participating in jiu-jitsu tournaments and stuff, so I assume he's probably going to be in decent shape. And if he's still training his MMA, you'd have to assume that during the 4 years off, he's probably improved his striking a little bit. And I definitely hope that it is something he's worked on, because he's going to be going up against Abdul Razak Alhassan, who once upon a time this guy was a knockout artist, but ever since he's returned, he's just not been the same fighter. I think it's a mix of just the long layoff, obviously all the personal stuff that's happened to him, very unfortunate, but it's a mix of that, and then the fact that I think a lot of opponents have kind of figured out his game. They're not playing into that, just brawl with him in that first round, because if you're not doing that, if you're staying safe, he'll punch himself out, and then it's pretty much just, you could coast the rest of the fight, because the guy's really only got 1 round of cardio in him, and he's not very good at pacing himself either. So, yeah, he's got 1 round of cardio, and he's going all out in that 1 round. And in his return fight against Lazez, we kind of saw what happens when you don't engage with him in the brawl. Lazez was able to pretty much just shell up in that first round and, kind of just roll with the punches a bit, stay safe, and weather the early storm of Alhassan. And, after about like the 3-minute mark, Alhassan pretty much gassed himself out. Lazez was able to start getting off on some of his strikes, was even able to work some of the grappling late in that first round. And, from there, the tides just completely shifted. And from that performance, Alhassan has looked just worse and worse, in each consecutive fight. Because at least in that fight, he had, 2-3 minutes in there where he actually looked decent. But, against Williams, the guy pretty much gets starched in the first, 30 seconds. That was a flash knockout, and, that stuff happens. But somehow he looks even worse against Jacob Malkoun, who was essentially just being fed to him, right? The guy was 4-1 going into that fight. Very limited MMA experience. Was coming off of a knockout loss, too, against Phil Hawes. This was supposed to be an absolute layup for Alhassan, but, he drops the ball there. Malkoun is able to get to his grappling early and pretty much just dominate Alhassan for 3 rounds. And, that is just not a good look whatsoever, because prior to that fight, the thing with Alhassan was he does have a lot of power. He is very explosive. And, especially in that 3rd round, he's going to be extremely dangerous. But, that fight showed that even in the first round, the guy can be neutralized. And, against someone like Braga Neto, who does have that grappling base, you do have to expect him to really attack that grappling early, right? So I think this fight is, going to be pretty straightforward to break down. Alhassan, he's going to have a very small window early in the fight to knock Braga Neto out. But, if he isn't able to get it, if Braga Neto is able to get his hands on him, drag him to the ground, I think the fight's pretty much going to be over. I think Alhassan's just going to be way too tired after the first grappling exchange to really do any significant damage. And, Braga Neto is a very high-level jiu-jitsu artist, so if it gets to the ground, I do see a potential submission there. So the pick here for me is going to be Braga Neto. I just cannot pick Alhassan after those past 3 performances. That said, I wouldn't be completely surprised if Alhassan just starches Braga Neto early. But, I am going to lean towards the Braga Neto side. I think that it's kind of unlikely at this point in his career for Alhassan to, just make a resurgence or anything. So the pick here is Braga Neto. There is obviously some concerns with the long layoff and everything. It's definitely something to keep in mind there. And, it'll be good to see how he looks at the weigh-ins as well. I don't think the guy's going to be out of shape, but, if he is, definitely don't pick him. But the pick right now for me is going to be Braga Neto, and I think he gets it done by round 2 submission. And in the next fight, we have Malecki versus Josiane Nunes. And Malecki's the minus 145 favorite. Come back on Nunes is plus 125. And with Malecki, she is primarily a striker. She likes to move forward, likes to throw volume, but, honestly, I don't think is that good. Her striking, it is a bit stiff in my opinion, a bit basic, and, her footwork is not great. She likes to pressure her opponents, but she just does not do a good job of cutting off the cage. She tends to just follow opponents around the cage and kind of just chase them around in there. And, the fight that really comes to mind is that Veronica Macedo fight where she's basically just chasing her around the cage for 3 rounds. It kind of reminded me of Tom and Jerry a little bit, especially with just how big of a size discrepancy was between the two. But, on the feet, for as much as she throws, she does absorb a lot of damage as well. So, yeah, she's a bit hittable, and I feel that in both of her fights, she's kind of just been able to get away with just being the more athletic, being the stronger, bigger fighter in there. And, there was this really weird exchange in the Macedo fight where Malecki almost hurdles over Macedo, but, obviously she doesn't clear her. She kind of catches her along like the midsection or her waist or something like that, and basically just runs through her and ends up falling into full mount. So yeah, that was a very weird exchange. And what's even crazier is Malecki wasn't really able to do anything, in full mount. So, not a great fighter in my opinion. Just very, very one-dimensional striker, very green, obviously. Her opponent, Josiane Nunes, I think is in a pretty similar situation, pretty low-level fighter too, in my opinion. She's an absolute tank of a woman, very small, very very squat. She likes to blitz in and just wing bombs against her opponents. And, similar to Malecki, I feel that she is a bit green too. She's got a few more wins on her record, but, they're against very low-level fighters who I think probably just kind of fold in there, when pressured. And, against someone like Nunes, who does seem to pack a bit of a punch, they're probably not going to want to stay in there for too long with her. And, that's kind of what she likes to do. She has a bit of power. We'll look to swarm opponents if she senses that they're hurt. But, like I said before, they're against very low-level fighters. And if you watch some of the fights she's in, it's not like she's starching her opponents or anything. A lot of the times, they're just shelling up, and, the ref has given them the mercy stoppage there because they're not really defending themselves. But I think it just says more about her opponents than it really says about Nunes. Kind of just shows that they're not really meant to fight professionally. And, it sounds kind of mean, but just telling it as it is, because, if you're at the low levels of the regional scene and, you're looking for a way out there, then you're probably not meant for the sport. And ultimately, that's kind of the feeling I get from a lot of Nunes' opponents so far. So ultimately, what I'm trying to say here is, even though Nunes technically has more professional fights, I don't think that she's a much more skilled opponent than Malecki. But, just taking a look at this matchup, I do feel that Malecki should slightly be favored, just on the basis of being the more athletic fighter, being the bigger fighter in there. And, just being the more aggressive fighter, I guess, she'll definitely look to throw volume. Whereas with Nunes, she's probably just going to look to lower her head and just start winging bombs in there. And, if that strategy doesn't work for Nunes, I just don't know what she can really fall back to. Because outside of that, something I forgot to mention was that Nunes does seem to struggle off her back a bit. I've seen her spend a lot of time off her back, actually, in some of the regional footage. So if Malecki... she's not really a grappler, but if this fight again somehow ends up on the ground, I think it'll definitely favor her, just because she's going to be the much bigger fighter once again. And, if she's on top, I think Nunes is going to have a hard time getting Malecki off of her, even though I don't think that Malecki is that proficient on the ground. So, yeah, I am going to side with Malecki here just on the basis of, her being the bigger fighter. I don't think she's much better than Nunes, but she's going to have a pretty big size advantage over her. I don't think I'll bet this fight. I think both fighters are still very unproven. There's not a lot of footage on either fighter either. So, it's really hard to just gauge how good they really are and how they'll truly match up. So, I'll pass this fight from a betting perspective. But the pick here is going to be Malecki. And in the next fight, we have Ramiz Brahimaj versus Sasha Palatnikov. And Brahimaj is the minus 117 favorite. Comeback on Palatnikov is minus 103. And Palatnikov is, the guy is a grappler. His base is in, jiu-jitsu. However, his UFC debut against Max Griffin, the guy did not shoot a takedown whatsoever. And, on the feet, his striking is honestly a bit basic, a bit predictable. So it was really weird seeing him not try and get the fight to the ground against Griffin, considering he was getting, touched up pretty badly in that fight too. But in a lot of his regional fights, he is able to get the fight to the ground. He's able to, pretty aggressively look for submissions and is usually able to get them, at least on the regional scene. His opponent, Palatnikov, so I haven't actually found too much tape on him, but from what I have seen, he does appear to be a, pretty well-rounded fighter, I guess. His striking is decent. Seems kind of tough, I guess. I mean, he's gotten a number of finishes on his record, but, I guess I'm just saying that because of his Louis Koski performance where, Koski was just putting it on him early in that fight, and he was able to tough it out and eventually was able to turn the tides and, end up finishing the fight sometime in the third. But, overall, it does look like Palatnikov's got pretty decent striking. Does have a bit of grappling to fall back to as well. But, I just don't think he's a very high-level fighter. And, quite frankly, I don't think he's UFC caliber. He's just one of these guys who was able to, come in short notice and, he was able to pull a win out of his ass. And now he's got, a few fights left on his contract. And he's definitely going to try and make the most out of this here against Brahimaj, who, I'd say is a pretty solid grappler. So, man, as far as this matchup goes, though, I just don't have a great read on it, honestly. I think that maybe if Brahimaj is able to get this fight to the ground, he could potentially find the submission. We did see Cannonier get the sub early in that second round against Palatnikov, and, Cannonier, in my opinion, still a pretty green striker, so him being able to pull that off is not a particularly good look for Palatnikov. However, I think that if Palatnikov is able to keep this fight standing, he should have a bit of an advantage on the feet. Not a crazy advantage, I don't think, but I do think that he should be able to get the better of the exchanges. But, ultimately, I don't have a great read for this fight. But, if I did have to pick someone there, I'm going to side with Brahimaj just because I think that his specialty, his grappling is going to be enough to really tip the scales in his favor. I think that if he looks, for the grappling, I do think that the submission is live for him. Whereas with Palatnikov, I just don't see a very clear path to victory other than, just keeping the fight standing and outstriking Brahimaj. But I'm not even entirely convinced that Palatnikov's going to, completely get the better of Brahimaj. I think that maybe, he'll definitely have some moments in there, but I don't think that he's going to be blowing Brahimaj out of the water or anything. But ultimately, I do expect Brahimaj to look to get the grappling going. And if he does that, I think he could win a pretty comfortable decision, if not get the submission here. So the pick here is Brahimaj, but I don't think I'll be betting this fight. I was looking at the Brahimaj by submission prop as well, but, it's only plus 185, so I don't know if I really want to take a stab at that. I'd like little juicier odds. But yeah, outside of that, I don't think I'll be betting this fight. And in the next fight, we have Austin Lingo versus Luis Saldaña. And Saldaña is the minus 150 favorite. Comeback on Lingo is plus 130. And, this should be a pretty exciting fight. Striker versus striker. Saldaña fighting more out of that, kickboxing stance. I've actually seen him fight well out of both stances. He's got a good jab, a good kicking game. Really like how he goes to the body. He will occasionally mix in some spinning attacks as well. Overall, I'd see him being the more diverse striker. The guy, he mixes up pretty well overall. And, so far he's looked pretty good. But, it has been against pretty low-level opponents. And, he does have some pretty questionable losses in there as well. Particularly that one loss against Alex Wiggs, who was 3-2 at the time. And, just overall, the guy has a good amount of losses, even on the regional scene. So, not a particularly great look. But in the fights, he has been winning. He has looked, pretty solid there. He does seem to have a pretty bad tendency to stay on his back a little too long. And, I think that Griffin fight is a really good example of that. That was a fight he very easily could have lost. And some people argue that maybe he did lose that fight. I'm not going to really argue that. But, in the second and third round, the guy did give up a lot of control time, just staying on his back, for way too long. And, in certain exchanges, it looked like he was initiating some of those grappling exchanges as well, even though I feel he didn't need to, because on the feet, he was getting the better of Griffin in most of those exchanges. So I do feel that his fight IQ is a little bit questionable. Outside of that, though, he does seem to be a pretty decent fighter. His opponent, Lingo, is primarily a striker as well. Bit heavy on the boxing stance, and he does seem to have some power in his hands. Has a number of early knockouts, but we'll need to see how that really translates into the UFC, because a lot of those finishes pretty early and against pretty low-level competition. And he looked pretty good in his recent fight against Kilburn, but I feel that early knockdown pretty much just changed the dynamic of the fight, where Kilburn was definitely much more wary and tentative of the power coming from Lingo after that knockdown. That said, though, it does seem that even if he isn't able to put you out, he does have some fight-changing power. And I guess the big takeaway from that fight was that he did go a good 3 rounds against Kilburn, which we haven't really seen from him on the regional scene. And in the fight before that, he pretty much got dominated by Zalal in the grappling. Zalal was able to just repeatedly hit takedowns on him, which, at the time made me kind of overrate the wrestling of Zalal, when in fact I think Lingo just has pretty bad takedown defense. I think in hindsight now it's pretty obvious that Zalal's just a very middling grappler. He's a good overall fighter, but he's not like a very elite wrestler or anything. The guy's, he's going to work the takedowns, but, I just don't think he's a very dominant wrestler. I think that performance was just a bit of an anomaly in my opinion. But going back to this matchup, I don't think it'll matter too much, since both guys are primarily strikers, and both guys have actually pretty bad defensive grappling tendencies. But for this matchup, I do think that most of it should be on the feet. And, on the feet, I do slightly favor Saldaña a little bit more. I think he's got, much more diverse striking. He works his kicking game, I think, much more. That said, though, I do think that Lingo's probably going to have a bit more power. But, if he's not landing that power shot on Saldaña, I just see Saldaña kind of running away with it in the striking. I think Saldaña's got the better footwork in there. And, with how diverse his striking game is and how heavy Lingo stands on his lead leg, I do see Saldaña being able to get off on his kicks quite a bit more. And, I do think that Saldaña's got slightly better distance management. And if the fight does somehow end up on the ground, I do favor Saldaña there a little bit more. I think he's a little more well-versed there. And as far as their defensive grappling goes, I just think that Lingo is a little bit worse there than Saldaña, although I think both guys are pretty bad at defensive grapplers. So for that reason, I am going to side with Saldaña here, but, I don't think I'll be betting this fight either. Both guys are still relatively unproven in the UFC and, are still, pretty green and do have some pretty big flaws in their game. So I don't think I'll be betting this fight, but the pick here is going to be Saldaña. And moving along, we have Parker Porter versus Chase Sherman, and Chase Sherman is the minus 190 favorite. Come back on Porter is plus 165. And so we have our patented low-level heavyweight fight here. Chase Sherman, so I don't quite know what to make of him so far, and it's kind of hard to really gauge how he stands and where he stands in the division. I think his striking is a little bit underwhelming, but he's really only lost to solid UFC level fighters. You have to go all the way back to 2016 when he lost to Justin Ledet, who is I guess he's not that good. I think he's like on a 4 or 5 fight losing streak. So, Ledet, not that great, but, he has been in the UFC for a little while. And then, Walt Harris, who, has been in the UFC for quite a while, even though he is on a pretty bad losing streak. Shamil Abdurakhimov, not Justin Willis. Justin Willis is, I don't think, that good. Augusto Sakai, Andrei Arlovsky. So, most of his losses are against, solid UFC fighters. But, the wins are against very very questionable level of competition. Ike Villanueva, Damian Grabowski, Rashad Coulter. So, not the best wins ever, but the losses aren't, terrible or anything. He's not the most technical fighter or anything, but, generally he does like to move forward and throw volume. He is generally pretty tough. He has been finished, but, again, this is against, pretty solid UFC level fighters. And, against the lower level guys like the Ike Villanuevas of, the world, he'll be able to put on a pretty good performance. And, I guess the real question here is where Parker Porter stands in terms of level of competition for Sherman, right? Like, I feel that for Parker Porter, I think he's definitely more along the level of someone like Ike Villanueva as opposed to, the Andrei Arlovskis or the Augusto Sakais of the division. Porter, I'm actually not very impressed with the guy. He's definitely a grinder. He's someone who will make a fight very, very sloppy. He'll like to move forward too, throw combinations. He does have some pretty heavy leg kicks, but, he is someone who is content to work in the clinch and possibly, get the grappling going a bit. The guy, he's a pretty big guy, so he will look to, put his weight on you. That said, though, I have seen him slow down, but, he has shown to be able to fight through it pretty well. But, if you look at the guys he's fighting, he's not exactly fighting the best fighters in there, fighters or even fighters who could really punish him for slowing down, right? And, I don't really think that Sherman is going to be that fighter either, but I do feel that Sherman is probably a bit more athletic and a little bit better than some of the opponents that Parker Porter has fought, right? And, he is coming off of a win against Josh Parisian, who, I actually faded in that fight. But I think that just says more about Parisian than it says about Porter, right? Because in that fight, Porter was able to really get, the clinch work going. And, both guys were honestly slowing down quite a bit in that fight. But this is Josh Parisian we're talking about. And, he sucks. This is a Josh Parisian that got controlled in the clinch against, Parker Porter and Rocky Martinez. Two guys I actually, faded Parisian with. And, arguably I think that Rocky Martinez could have won that fight. I think he should have won that fight. That said, though, it's just not a good look. The guy's getting, controlled in the clinch by guys half his size. So I really think that performance says more about Parisian than it says about Parker Porter. But, taking a look at this matchup, I do have to favor Sherman here. I just think he's overall the better athlete. He's going to be the bigger, likely stronger guy in there. I think he's got all the physical advantages. And, while I do think that Porter is the more well-rounded fighter, I definitely favor Sherman on the feet quite a bit more. If Porter isn't able to get his grappling going, I see Sherman being able to touch him up on the feet, honestly. And on top of that, Sherman's fought the way higher level of competition. He's lost a ton of times against the higher level guys, but, it's still... He still fought UFC level competition, whereas with Porter, he hasn't really fought anyone of note whatsoever. I just don't really see Porter having too much success with that, clinch, grindy sort of game that he likes to employ. I think that, he's going to struggle closing the distance. I think that Sherman's going to be able to hit him if he looks to crash the distance there. And I just think that Sherman's probably just going to be the much stronger fighter. He's not going to be able to... He's not going to let Porter just bully him in the clinch. So, where the line stands now, I think is honestly pretty fair. I would cap Sherman at around like minus 180, minus 200. So, I think it's about right here. I don't really see any value in Porter. Usually with these low-level heavyweight fights, I like to take the dog here, but I just don't think Porter is the guy. And, I'm not super high on Sherman either, but I do think he gets it done here. And in the first fight, we have Fabio Cherant versus William Knight. And so this is hands down probably the two least skilled fighters on the card. And this isn't even a fight that I'm the most interested in or, the fight that I was most excited to break down. But I just kind of feel that this might be a fight that gets mislined. So I did a bit of tape on it early. And, with Cherant, the guy is, he's coming off a loss against Menefield, who was actually supposed to fight Knight initially. But, I think Knight pulled out and he had to come in on short notice and pretty much got dominated. He got subbed by Alonzo Menifield, I think, in like the first like 2 or 3 minutes or something like that. And, that's just not a great look, right? Because Menifield's mainly just like the power puncher, right? So anyways, on the feet, Cherant's got pretty bad striking, honestly. Lots of telegraph power shots. Obviously, he does have the power, but that's about it. He's throwing the same strikes over and over, honestly, and his cardio isn't that great either. I think there was a regional fight that I saw where he just kind of gassed out in a very low volume fight. I mean, I believe it was against UG where, it was like late into the second round and the guy just had his hands on his knees near the end of the round during the fight, right? It wasn't even like the bell had rung and he decided to put his hands on his knees, but the guy was just so tired that there was still, I think, like a good minute left on the clock. He just had to kind of rest a little bit. However, I think the worst thing about him is just how bad he's looked off his back. The guy's just a complete fish out of water when he's on his back. I mean, honestly, just getting subbed by Menifield really says it all, right? That was a fight where, honestly, Menifield probably could have gotten the sub much earlier if he knew what he was doing there. But, I think he finally knew that the Von Flue choke was there for him after like a good 30 seconds or a minute, having him in that position. But yeah, just getting subbed by Menifield like that, just not a very good look. And overall, I just don't think the guy's particularly good. Really just is super one-dimensional, just has that, overhand kill shot that he's looking for. As opponent, William Knight, pretty similar situation, honestly. I don't think the guy is that skilled. He does throw some pretty heavy leg kicks, but the striking is just not there. He's honestly a bit stiff on his feet. Again, lots of single shots as well, just no head movement. Does have pretty bad defensive grappling too. I mean, this was a fight in his fight with Jung was able to just continuously hit the same trip over and over and get him to the ground. And off his back, Knight really wasn't able to do anything. The guy wasn't able to get up and just looked completely lost there as well. With all that said, though, I do think that there is still some upside with Knight in the sense that, Knight, I believe, is a serviceable grappler, at least as far as this matchup goes. So while his defensive grappling isn't great, he's got decent offensive grappling, and he is pretty reliable to go to his wrestling, look to get the fight in the clinch. His technique isn't the best. He does look to muscle his opponent to the ground a lot, but, he is reliable to do it. You can expect him to look to get the fight, to the ground, or at least work in the clinch. And then from there, he will look to lay the ground and pound, just smother his opponents, work a bit of control there. So, the guy, while he's not that great, he does show a pretty consistent game plan. On top of that, he does seem to have pretty decent cardio as well. I mean, he went 3 pretty hard rounds with Alexa Kammer, and he does have a number of fights that go late into the second, third round. So the guy's cardio, I think, checks out for, how high of a grappling pace he usually puts on. So for that reason, I do have to side with the William Knight side. I think he should be able to dominate Cherant, honestly. I think that outside of Cherant landing a bomb on Knight, I just don't think that he'll have much to offer for Knight. On the feet, I think it might actually be pretty even though I think that both guys are pretty low-level strikers. I do favor Knight to land maybe the heavier leg kicks, but on the feet I do think that Cherant is going to be live for that knockout. The guy does have tremendous power, so that always is going to be live, but I do expect Knight to get this fight to the ground and look to just really dominate him there. As far as how I'd line this fight, though, I think that Knight should be at least around like minus 200, and that does seem kind of crazy to say out loud here, but I just think that Knight is the far superior grappler, and what it really comes down to is that the only strength that Knight has plays right into Cherant's biggest weakness, right? And that's the grappling. If Knight is able to get Cherant off, on his back, I don't think Cherant will really be able to do anything. I think that, he should be able to dominate him for a pretty comfortable decision, or possibly even get the ground and pound finish. This is actually a fight where I'm going to be looking at the round 3 prop, just because I think that, that first round and a half or so, Cherant is probably still going to have enough energy to defend against Knight's takedowns and, defend against some of the ground and pound. But I think going into the second half of the fight, later into the second half or even into the third round, I think that Cherant is going to be way too tired to be, defending well, and Knight's just going to be able to unload on him in that late second or third round and potentially get the stoppage there. With how bad Cherant is off his back and how bad his cardio is, I think this is a fight where it's going to end in either the second or third round. I'm thinking third round, but I wouldn't be surprised if a second round stoppage happened as well. So the pick here for me is going to be Knight. I think he wins pretty handily here. I think he either gets it done by very dominant decision or via KO TKO stoppage from ground and pound. And in the next fight, we have Roosevelt Roberts versus Ignacio Bahamondes. And, man, this is going to be a pretty exciting fight, I think. Bahamondes usually brings the action, and Roosevelt Roberts, once upon a time was considered a prospect, although at this point in his career, I feel like he's definitely a bit of a busted prospect now. Anyways, with Roberts, the guy is a pretty well-rounded fighter, in my opinion. He is primarily a counter-striker from what I've seen. He does back up a lot, but, he is pretty sharp, does have good timing. He will mix in the wrestling, though, but, he isn't a very prolific wrestler or grappler. But, he'll look to wall install, look to time a level change, and, get a bit of control time. But, he's not not a great wrestler, and he definitely looks like his jiu-jitsu defense is a little suspect. And overall, I just feel like he's kind of an opportunistic wrestler. He's not going to go out there, hunting, takedowns and stuff. But, if an opening presents itself, he'll shoot the takedown, which, I don't know how I feel about that because the guy I don't think is, again, a very good grappler. So it seems like he's just looking to wrestle just to wrestle sometimes. So, I guess it's good to kind of keep your opponent guessing at certain points, and it does score well on the scorecards, but I just don't know how big of an effect it's really having for him in some of these fights. And I do feel that in some of these fights it's actually worked against him, particularly in that Jim Miller fight where I think he took Miller down, but you really don't want to do that against Miller, who's first round sub or bust, and was able to pull off that armbar early in that first round. And then against Kevin Kroom, where, he did get rocked that fight early, kind of dove into a guillotine and pretty much just wasn't able to get out of it, gets subbed within like the first minute. So 2 back-to-back fights where he gets subbed early. Just not a great look. But, overall, I don't think the guy is particularly bad or anything. He's a decent fighter who, got caught twice. But, if I'm being honest, I don't think he's that good either. I think he's probably a middling, barely UFC level sort of fighter at best. I mean, he's still pretty young and, he could be making improvements, but from what I've seen so far, I don't think he's got a very high ceiling. And, the reason I say that is because, on the regional scene, he's one of these guys who's getting a ton of finishes. And then once he's gotten to the UFC, he's kind of fallen a bit flat. The only finish he's gotten since then was against Brock Weaver, who is pretty much just a regional bum, honestly. So, yeah, as far as how I'd rate Roberts, I'd say he'd be a really solid, high-level regional fighter. But when it comes to the UFC, I think he's, just a step above being, UFC caliber. So, yeah, that's just how I feel about him. Anyways, with his opponent, Ignacio Bahamondes, I think, the guy's probably got a bit more upside. He is a bit younger, but, on the feet, the guy is, very flashy on the feet, very aggressive, will throw a ton of volume, and, he mixes up a lot of his striking very well. He'll mix in the kicks very well. But, yeah, the guy's a very fun fighter to watch. I think he definitely passes the eye test quite a bit better than Roberts. He still is a bit unproven, I think, but from what I've seen so far, I do think that the ceiling might potentially be a bit higher. That said, though, Bahamondes does have some deficiencies on the feet. The guy is a bit hittable, and we haven't seen too much from his defensive grappling, but from what I remember seeing, on him in some of the regional tape is, in a few of the grappling exchanges, I think he was able to hit a sweep on one of his opponents. He isn't someone that, has been controlled on the ground for too long, but, again, there's not a lot of footage there, so I can't say for certain if he's a great defensive grappler or not. And, for the sake of this matchup, I don't think it'll matter too much. I definitely feel that Roberts will probably look to wrestle a bit, but I don't think Roberts is, high enough level there to really take advantage of it in this fight. But yeah, this is a very interesting stylistic matchup because, Bahamondes, he is going to look to move forward. And I do think that Roberts is going to kind of play into that a little bit. But, he is a counter striker, so there will be a lot of opportunities for him to find the mark on Bahamondes as well. So that'll definitely be very intriguing in my opinion. However, on the feet, I would have to give a slight advantage to Bahamondes. I think that the aggression and the pressure and the volume is going to slightly tip the fight in his favor. However, I do have to say that Bahamondes is not going to come out of these exchanges unscathed. I think that it will still remain relatively close, with Bahamondes likely edging it out, since I think he's going to be the one throwing a little bit more, and he likely will be the one leading. However, I do expect Roberts to work a bit of the wrestling, and I think that will kind of neutralize some of the aggression, and that'll help him a bit in terms of scoring a bit on the scorecards. However, overall, I do have to slightly favor Bahamondes a little bit more, just because I think he'll do enough on the feet to overcome whatever grappling edge that Roberts has. Although, I'm not super confident about it, because if Roberts is able to hit a takedown and get maybe a minute or two of control time, that definitely could swing the round in his favor. But, if Bahamondes is able to stuff a few of those takedowns, he could definitely kind of run away with a decision here, since the guy, if he is able to get going, it's going to be really hard to play catch up with this guy, because he's just going to keep throwing and, keep moving forward. So, as far as how I'd line this fight, I'd say this one's another one that would be pretty close to being a pick'em. So, pretty good matchmaking, if I'm being honest. But, unless I'm getting, solid dog odds for either fighter, I don't know if I'll be betting this fight either, because I do feel it is a pretty close fight. But ultimately, I am going to go with Bahamondes here. I think that he'll be able to keep it on the feet long enough and do enough on the feet to win a pretty comfortable decision. All right, and moving along, we have Mark Madsen versus Clay Guida. And let's start with Madsen first. And just a funny little story here. For the longest time, I was calling Madsen Madsen, like he was Irish or something. So I might slip up here a few times just because I've been saying that for so long. So, anyways, with Madsen, the guy's a fantastic wrestler. The guy's an Olympian, in case you didn't know. I mean, the guy's not subtle with that whatsoever. But, he is very strong, very explosive. The guy's got a crazy grip. And, he's really heavy on opponents, will hang off of him and kind of just look to make them bear his weight. And that honestly constitutes most of his offense. The guy isn't very active with the ground and pound, and his top control honestly isn't that great. He mainly wins fights on the basis of just landing takedowns over and over, and then getting a bit of control time in between. So, the guy is definitely a grinder when it comes to the grappling. And on the feet, it's definitely not that good there. The guy really just looks to wing overhands to close the distance. But, outside of that, his striking is honestly pretty limited. Obviously, the guy is an elite wrestler, so he's going to look to get the fight there. But overall, the guy is very tough, very gritty, and, he will fight through fatigue. Like in his fight against Hubbard, the guy was just completely gassed in that third round and, was still looking to attack the wrestling there. Ate a few nasty knees to the face and still was able to keep moving forward. But, that just goes to show you, the heart of someone who's, an Olympic level wrestler, just showing the grit and the toughness. Something I did notice, though, it does look like he has some slightly questionable defensive jiu-jitsu, because, there were some situations where it definitely looked like he was putting himself in some bad spots. And, against a high level jiu-jitsu guy, I think he could potentially get caught. But, going up against Clay Guida, I don't think that's going to be too big of an issue. Guida, also a guy with a wrestling base. But, he's definitely a veteran of the sport at this point and has a lot more time to round out the rest of his game. His striking has come along and, it's not, great or anything, but it's definitely serviceable, definitely better than Madsen's at this point. And even though Guida's striking is coming along, I think that he's still much more confident in his grappling. I mean, even at age 40, the guy's shooting takedowns against Michael Johnson and Bobby Green. Granted, those were fights where there was a pretty big skill or a pretty big striking skill gap on the feet. So that was a fight where he kind of did have to go to the wrestling. But, even before that, the guy is still looking to take his opponents down. And, that just goes to show you the cardio that this guy comes in with, right? The guy always comes in with, just fantastic cardio, always puts on a pace, constantly moving on the feet, is constantly working for the takedowns. And, that's just kind of the fighter that Clay Guida is. But, he'll be fighting an elite wrestler in Madsen here who, I think should be able to match him in terms of, like the grappling output and pace. So, yeah, I think this will be a pretty tough matchup for Guida. I think that, his best path to victory might actually just to keep the fight standing, because I think that Madsen's likely going to be the one hitting the offensive takedowns. Usually Guida is going to be the guy doing this, but, I think that in this fight, the script's going to be flipped a little bit because Madsen's going to be the much more aggressive and just much higher level wrestler. Whereas Guida, being the more well-rounded fighter, being the fighter with likely, the better striking, he'll have to use his wrestling in reverse here to keep the fight standing and look to, I guess, kind of just touch Madsen up on the feet. But, Guida is not that good of a striker. He's not gonna put out Madsen. I don't think he's gonna run away with the striking either. And, for that reason, I do have to side with Madsen here. I do think that Madsen should be a decent sized favorite. I don't think that Guida is a good enough striker to really punish Madsen on the feet. And I don't think he's got like super dangerous or slick jiu-jitsu to really, catch Madsen, in the grappling exchanges. And I don't think he's a good enough wrestler to be hitting takedowns consistently on Madsen either, or defend his takedowns with, a high success rate. So I kind of see this fight playing out likely against the cage on the ground. I see Madsen just hitting a ton of takedowns on Guida, maybe looking to take the back, just hang off of him, get a lot of control time off of Guida. And, I kind of see him winning similar to how guys like, what's his name? Dvalishvili win, just constant volume takedowns and just win based off of that. That said, though, I don't think this is like an easy win by any means for Madsen, even though, Clay Guida, he is 40 years old, but, the guy is a veteran of the sport. He's very crafty in there. And, I do expect Madsen to win that first round pretty dominantly. I think that second round is likely going to be his too, but, if Guida's really making him work in those first round and, part of that second round, Madsen could slow down and Guida could potentially turn the tables on him a bit in that second round. But, I am leaning towards Madsen, getting a lot of takedowns in that second round as well. And then that third round, he might be a little too tired to consistently go to the wrestling. But, like I said before, unlike guys like Hubbard or even some of the other strikers he's fought, I don't think that Guida will pose too much of a threat against Madsen in that third round. And, Madsen, the guy is very tough. He does have decent cardio and he will fight through it. So I do feel the third round is going to be pretty competitive, even if he is tired. So, yeah, I do have Madsen winning here, and as far as where I'd line it, I'd say around like minus 180 or so. I think that there's a good chance that Madsen is going to be able to bank 2 rounds with the wrestling pretty easily. But oh man, the only thing I'm kind of put off by is maybe like the judging, because that's really all Madsen does, right? He's just gonna hit takedowns on you, a bit of control time, hit takedowns, a bit of control time. So if Guida is able to get off a bit on the striking and stuff maybe one of the takedowns or something, and the judges fucking, score that for him, I wouldn't be completely surprised. We've seen judging, it's just very inconsistent sometimes. But, I'm going to lean towards them scoring the takedowns well. And for that reason, I have Madsen winning by decision here. Okay, moving along, we have Austin Hubbard versus Vinc Pichel. And pretty interesting fight here. Hubbard, he's a fighter that I actually don't have that good of a read on. He's fought primarily grapplers, so it's kind of hard to really gauge how good he is so far. I mean, he's really only fought one type of opponent, so That's that. As far as the striking goes, I think it's serviceable. I don't think it's anything great. He does seem a little, or his punches do seem a little loopy in there. I don't know if his hand speed's all that quick either. And a lot of the time, he's honestly just being wrestled in there. Guys are hanging off of him. He's really just looking to get off from like bottom or something. And so I haven't really been able to see him really get his striking game going. He's never really had a chance to kind of fully let his hands go. He'll have some moments where he could put a combination together, but, overall, I don't know if he's had more than like a minute or minute and a half of consecutive, time where he's just standing and striking. Outside of maybe the Dakota Bush fight, his most recent fight against the guy making short notice UFC debut in Dakota Bush, and that wasn't a great look, honestly, because that felt like a pretty close fight, at least for like the first round and a half or so. And if I remember correctly, that was a fight where both guys were pretty gassed, and that was a little surprising to see coming from Hubbard, since historically he has been someone who has been able to pick it up in the second, third round. But this was a fight where I think both guys kind of came in a little strong that first round and then kind of tapered off. But overall, that just wasn't really a good look for me, considering Bush was coming in short notice. And I think Hubbard really just went on the basis of Bush pretty much just running out of steam there, and just being super gassed in that second and third round. Wasn't able to put up much resistance. And Hubbard, he didn't look great in those second and third rounds. He more or less kind of just coasted those rounds and took the safe way out. But prior to that, the guys fought primarily grapplers, and what he's kind of done in a number of those fights has just kind of survived, and then looked to put it on his opponents later in the fight. We kind of saw that against Mark Madsen, where for the first two rounds, Madsen was pretty much just dominating in a lot of the wrestling exchanges. He was taking him down. He was getting a bit of control time. But that third round, Madsen was, he was gassed out from, hitting all those takedowns. Whereas Hubbard, he was still a little fresh. He was still, he was conserving his energy the first two rounds. And, he was able to kind of put it on him a bit, landed a few knees on Madsen, was touching him up. But, Madsen was able to gut it out. Then in his fight against Roshkov, same deal. That first round, Roshkov started pretty strong, gassed himself out. Second round, Hubbard put it on him, and then obviously Roshkov kind of just quit on the stool there after that second round. So we're kind of seeing a trend here with the opponents that Hubbard's faced so far, primarily wrestler, grappler type, who when he's winning, he's usually able to kind of conserve his energy, stay safe for like the first round and a half, and then look to put it on his opponents. But, if his opponents are able to, pace themselves well, they're able to kind of just gut out a 3-round decision there. So I just feel that we don't have too much information in terms of, the stylistic matchups that will pose an issue for Hubbard so far. Because really, again, we've only seen him against grapplers primarily, so we don't really know how he'll perform against, high-level strikers or fighters who are a bit more well-rounded. Someone like Pichel, who I would consider a bit more well-rounded, is going to be an interesting matchup for him because, with Pichel, the guy's striking is, it's pretty solid. It's pretty tight. He likes to pressure opponents. He likes to move forward. And, he's got a very just meat and potatoes sort of striking style. Nothing too flashy or explosive or anything. The guy's just, I think, a very solid striker. And then he also does have a bit of grappling in his back pocket as well. I don't think the guy is really elite anywhere, but, he is quite serviceable in regards to the grappling as well. And, he'll definitely go to it if he feels that he has an advantage there, because the guy does have pretty good fight IQ. The guy is a veteran at this point in his career. And, we did see that in his Roosevelt-Roberts fight where, he was a bit outgunned on the feet, but he did go to his wrestling enough to really neutralize that threat from Roberts. And then against Jim Miller, the guy knew exactly what to do in there. Jim Miller historically, performs his best in that first round. So he kind of, weathered that storm early there against Miller, and then pretty much just took him down that second and third round. Miller, having pretty bad cardio, wasn't able to keep up. And, Pichel was able to win a pretty decisive 29-28 decision. So, overall, Pichel, he is a very solid fighter, very well-rounded, and is someone who will fight with a solid game plan, and he does have good fight IQ in there. So I think there is a lot to like about Pichel. The only issue is the guy is a bit on the older side. At 38 at lightweight, that is getting a bit up there in age. I would consider that kind of old for the division. And while he doesn't have a ton of fight miles, he has had a number of injuries that he's gone through. He's also been relatively inactive, so it's really hard to gauge how much he's potentially fallen off by, because his last fight against Miller was about a year ago, and then even before that against Roosevelt Roberts, that was another year ago. And beating Jim Miller in late 2020, I don't think really says much about how he's at, where he's at physically. We know the skills there, but I just don't think that even if he had been on a decline, a noticeable decline, we'd have really seen it that fight, since I don't think that Miller would have been someone to really kind of expose that. Whereas with Hubbard, the guy is still very young, and he's making improvements. So if anyone's gonna be able to really kind of expose the age here of Pichel, it might be Hubbard, but I think there's just a lot of unknowns when it comes to Pichel at this point. But as far as this matchup goes, I think that I do have to slightly favor Pichel here, just because I feel that he's the more well-rounded fighter. I think that, on the feet, he's probably the better striker. Obviously, I think the big variable here is going to be the layoff, how he's going to look, and the age, obviously, and, how much of a decline he'll be on potentially, because I don't think that Hubbard will be that much quicker than him. I don't know if Hubbard's going to be just consistently beating him to the punch at this point in both of their careers, but I wouldn't be completely surprised. But assuming that Pichel hasn't fallen off a cliff completely, he should be pretty competitive on the feet. He might actually have a bit of an advantage there, because I do think he is the slightly more technical striker, and then obviously he does have the wrestling in his back pocket. And with Hubbard, while he has fought a lot of wrestlers and grapplers, and he has a lot of experience with them, he hasn't really fought anyone with half decent striking, which is kind of astonishing considering he's had like 7 or 8 fights in the UFC already. But if you look at the guys he's fought, I'd say they're all pretty subpar strikers, and Pichel is probably going to be the fighter who's, I think, most comfortable on his feet compared to the previous fighters that Hubbard has fought. And while Pichel does have the wrestling in the back pocket, it's not something that he, specifically game plans for. It's something that he'll use, to his advantage against fighters with weak, like, takedown defense or weak grappling. And it's definitely something he'll mix in, during rounds to win rounds that way as well. So I don't think it'd be wise for Pichel to aggressively attack the wrestling in this fight. I think it's something that he'll probably look to mix in, in the end of rounds or something, or if he finds an opening. But otherwise, I do expect him to look to keep the fight standing for the most part, and maybe shoot an opportunistic takedown. So ultimately, I am going to lean Pichel here, but just ever so slightly. I don't think that he's going to be completely blowing Hubbard out of the water with the striking, and the wrestling, I think he'll have a little bit of success with, maybe just enough to maybe swing rounds in his favor. But, I think this is a pretty close fight. Personally, I would line this close to being a pick'em fight, maybe a slight lean towards Pichel at like minus 120 or so, just because, I do think he's the little more well-rounded fighter at this point in his career. And, the only thing keeping me off from lining them as a bigger favorite again is going to be the age and the layoff. So the pick for me here is going to be Pichel, but I don't think I'll be betting this fight unless I'm getting a pretty solid plus number on either fighter. But Domingo Pilardi versus Brian Kelleher from this one. And Pilardi, so, the guys look pretty bad so far, if I'm being honest. From what I've seen, he does look to be a bit more of a front runner. Striking is a bit basic. Does much better when he's moving forward. But, we'll back up if, you heard him early, or, if you get his respect a bit, he'll start to back up a bit. And, in the Kelleher's fight, Kelleher's actually had a lot of success going to throwing the body kick and then looking to wall install. Pilardi wasn't really able to defend against that whatsoever, and that was just a very bad fight, very bad showing for him. And against Felipe Kelleher, who I think is a pretty bad fighter, he was able to come back a bit in that third round and back Kelleher, but he wasn't really able to do much with it, and ended up losing a pretty sound 29-28 decision. Then in his fight against Journey Newsom, he got a bit reckless and then got caught in that fight. But, that was about a year and a half ago. So, I don't really know what kind of improvements he might have made towards his game. But, just overall, the guy seems a bit passive on the feet. Definitely seems a bit more comfortable when he's grappling. But, all in all, I just don't think he's a really good fighter. I think that unless he's made some pretty crazy improvements during this time off, he's going to have a hard time against Kelleher. And I don't even think Kelleher's that good at this point in his career. I mean, so Kelleher, he's a veteran of the sport. He's a very scrappy fighter. He likes to move forward, blitz into the pocket, and throw combinations. And, that's kind of what he has to do since he usually is giving up a lot of size. The guy usually is going to be the smaller fighter in there. So he's going to have to look for a way to kind of close the distance and kind of do damage to his opponents that way. He's shown pretty decent cardio. He definitely has some wrestling that he can mix in as well. And, at this point in his career, he is a pretty well-rounded vet. But, I think at this age, he is on a bit of a decline. But, I don't know if it's a big enough decline for him to be losing to someone like Domingo Pilardi, who I think is not UFC caliber. And Kelleher is actually 3-2 in his last 5, with his 2 losses against Ricky Simone and Cody Stamen, who are both, pretty prolific wrestlers, very grindy, wet blanket sort of guys who had quite a bit of size over Kelleher. So, I don't think those are terrible losses. But if you look at his wins, I think they are a bit memey, I think. So you have to go back all the way to the Ode Osborne fight, which, very interesting to see how Osborne performs in this next fight, right? So that was a fight where Kelleher got the takedown early, was able to snatch up the guillotine, and Osborne ended up having to tap with his feet there. And then in the next fight against Hunter Azure, he was losing pretty soundly in that first round before catching Azure kind of late in that second round, putting him out. And then most recent win against Ray Rodriguez, very low-level guy, catches him in the guillotine within like the first minute. So, these guys that he's beating, very low-level, very green fighters. And, Pilardi definitely falls in this category where, very low-level and still pretty green. And so for that reason, I do have to slightly favor Kelleher a little bit more, but not by a wide margin, since I think that outside of, potentially catching Pilardi in something, he's going to have a rough time on the feet. And, if he isn't able to work his grappling or, get some top control time on Pilardi, again, this fight can be pretty close. But, Kelleher's just had a knack for catching these younger green fighters, right? And maybe it's because they kind of underestimate him going into that matchup because, the guy's a bit older and, he kind of looks like a garden gnome. They don't expect him to have that sort of power or have a really tight squeeze on his guillotine, and so they get caught. And, I do think that Pilardi's low enough level that Kelleher can catch him. But again, I don't know if you want to be laying crazy chalk on Kelleher to potentially catch Pilardi, right? But I definitely do feel that Kelleher will have some advantages on the feet. I think that if he's able to get the respect of Pilardi early, he could definitely have a bit of success there. Because like I said before, Pilardi, he does a lot better when he's moving forward. But if you're able to hurt him, if you are able to make him respect your power a bit, he will start to back up. And the guy is much worse when he's backing up. And, the guy fights a lot better when he's confident, when he's moving forward. But, if you're able to land a heavy shot on him, you crack him a bit. And the guy starts to wilt a bit, honestly. And, just with how aggressive and tenacious Kelleher is, I do think that can happen. And, Kelleher does have the wrestling to go to. I think that if he is able to get Pilardi down, he could have a bit of control time on top too. So I definitely do favor him a bit there. But there are a few things working against him. One, the age, obviously. I think that Kelleher is on a decline. He's 34, so he's not like super old or anything. But at bantamweight, that's kind of old. And he's given up crazy size advantage to Pilardi. Pilardi is going to be 6 feet 74 inch, whereas Kelleher's 5'6", 64 inch. So the measurables are definitely working against him. But stylistically, and as far as level of competition goes, I do favor Kelleher quite a bit. So for that reason, I'm gonna go with Kelleher. As far as lining the fight goes, I'd say Kelleher maybe like minus 130 to minus 160 or so, roughly. I don't think that he should be this big of a favorite, especially, again, giving up that much size and being that much older. Even though it is against a really bad Pilardi, it is a Pilardi who is going to be coming off of a 1.5-year long layoff. And while I don't think he's going to make crazy improvements, it is still enough time for him to, work and develop his game enough to, make this a close fight. So the pick here is Kelleher. I think he gets it done by decision, but I would not be surprised if he pulls off a guillotine here. All right, so moving along, we have Alexandre Pantoja versus Brandon Royval, and a very, very exciting fight for this matchup here. Pantoja, the guy's a very aggressive striker. He likes to move forward, likes to stalk his opponents. He's got a very heavy leg kick, and he's got very heavy hands as well. The guy's an absolute juggernaut on offense, and I think what makes him so effective as well is that, he's very tough, very hard to put down. I mean, the guy was taking just some very hard shots from, heavy hitters like Davison Figueiredo and Manel Cape. And, just a little sidebar here. I think how Cape performs against Osborne is, I think, going to shed a little light on this fight, because if Cape is just going to go out there and starch Osborne, which, I kind of have a feeling he will, I think it'll make Pantoja look even better in this fight, right? Because he was eating some pretty clean shots from Cape. But going back to Pantoja here, the guy is super durable. And, in his fight with Schnell, he was actually trading in the pocket with Schnell after Schnell had already wobbled him. So not the best decision making, but, the guy is fearless in there. And he is super durable. And he does have a ton of power. As far as his defensive grappling goes, his takedown defense isn't the best, but he does have pretty high-level jiu-jitsu. And that kind of worked against him in the Askarov fight, where he spent a lot of time off his back hunting subs. And I believe in the first round he did jump guillotine as well. And, all that really did was give Askarov a ton of control time instead of, I think what he should have done was try to keep the fight standing as much as possible, where I believe he'd have a pretty significant striking advantage. But, with how aggressive he was with attacking the sub and how comfortable he was off his back, he just gave up a ton of control time. And Askarov is a very high-level wrestler, and, generally I think it's pretty hard to sub someone from bottom unless they're just an absolute scrub in terms of jiu-jitsu. But, Askarov, the guy was able to stay safe defensively and kind of just grind out a win. But, something that I guess you can kind of take away from that fight, and kind of in general with Pantoja, is I feel he's a little bit gassy. I don't think his cardio is the best, but that was a pretty high-paced grappling fight, and, he didn't look just completely gassed out there. He did slow down a good amount, but, he was able to fight through it pretty well, and, Askarov is a really high-level wrestler. I mean, he might even be next in line for the title shot here, so, not a terrible loss for Pantoja, but, it is a little bit concerning against someone like Moreno or Royval, who will definitely look to put on a grappling pace as well. But overall, Pantoja is a really good fighter for the division. Definitely top 5, probably, arguably top 3. So, the guy is a very good fighter. His opponent, Royval, pretty solid fighter as well. Very well-rounded, all-action fighter, very active on the feet, lots of movement. But honestly, I think he's a little sloppy on the feet. He does get a little wild, a little hittable as well on the feet. Just not very tight striking. But, the guy is mainly a submission guy. I believe he's a black belt, but, generally he does look to get the fight onto the ground. He's very good in scrambles. He's very slick with his jiu-jitsu. The guy is kind of unorthodox there, I think. And, so it's kind of interesting, right, with how his UFC career has kind of gone. So he makes his UFC debut against Tim Elliott, where he kind of outpaces Tim Elliott on short notice and is able to get that round 2 submission against him. I don't think he was completely outclassing Elliott there, but, he was putting on quite a wrestling pace, or quite a grappling pace against Elliott, and Elliott just wasn't able to keep up, and Royval was able to get the submission. So, very impressive there, coming in short notice against a vet and Elliott, and, subbing him in the second round. And then in his next fight against Kai Kara France, the guy gets dropped early and then lands a spinning back elbow and drops France, and is able to kind of work him a bit in the grappling, and then France just kind of dives into a guillotine in that second round. So, the guy's 2-0 so far in the UFC against two very solid fighters, both winning by submission in the second round. So the guy's quickly moving up the ranks in the UFC. And then he gets matched with Brandon Moreno, who actually had to go to his wrestling a bit, right, to kind of look to control Royval a bit. And, he ended up finishing Royval early in the fight. I think Royval dislocated his shoulder or something, but, that fight was actually pretty competitive up until that point. So, yeah, Royval is just a really high motor sort of fighter, lots of action, very unorthodox, very slick on the ground, very unpredictable. And, the guy has definitely, he's definitely a fun fighter to watch, but, I'm still not completely sold on him yet. His wins have been impressive, and I do believe he belongs in the UFC. He's got a solid skill set, and he's got good physical attributes to succeed in the UFC. I mean, just being as durable and as tough as he is, plus like the cardio that he brings and the output that he brings, I think can get him really far in the UFC. But he's had some very what's the word? I don't want to say fluky wins, but these are some very these are some really crazy wins. I don't know if he's gonna be able to sustain this sort of success, especially against a killer in Pantoja, who's fought some of the best guys in the division. I have a feeling that Royval might be a dog of the week sort of play, and I can understand why. The guy has got a couple very solid wins in the UFC, and he just brings a certain like unpredictability with the style. And the guy's just a wild card, so I guess he is always live for a potential crazy submission finish or some spinning back elbow or something. But on the feet here, I think it's Pantoja all day. I think that Pantoja is going to have the much more technical striking. The guy's much more powerful. I think that paired with his aggression and his durability, I think that Royval's going to have a really hard time doing well on the feet. I'd say outside of like a crazy spinning back fist or, a jump knee or something, I just don't see Royval having too much success in the striking here. I definitely think that Pantoja will look to work the leg kicks. And with someone like Royval, who's got those big, long, lanky legs, I think it's going to be there for him to chop at it all day. And like I said before, Royval is a bit sloppy on the feet, and I do think that if he's not careful, Pantoja could definitely catch him. I mean, Kai Kara-France was able to land pretty clean on Royval, and, had he not landed that spinning back elbow, I think that Kai Kara-France probably could have swarmed him for the TKO there. And this is a matchup where I feel Pantoja should be the quicker fighter. So, again, if Royval's not tight with his technique, I do think that Pantoja could definitely time him there. As far as the grappling goes, this is where things get a little interesting because I do feel that Royval will look to get this fight to the ground where he's most comfortable. And we have seen Pantoja struggle a bit in high-paced grappling fights. And again, someone like Royval, I think that he may struggle there if Royval really aggressively pursues the grappling, because we have seen Royval put on a pretty crazy pace. And while Pantoja, he doesn't completely wilt, he does slow down. And the guy does seem to have a kind of a bad habit of, maybe playing off his back a little too long. And, that's definitely not going to be good if he does that here. It's going to be a waste of energy for him. I think he really should just keep this fight standing and look to strike where he's going to be the more dominant fighter, honestly. That said, though, I do expect Royval to look to shoot takedowns and get this fight to the ground. And, I don't know if I could really trust Pantoja to look to keep this fight standing 100%. But, if he does, I think he could be a pretty big favorite. And, as far as lining this fight goes, I'd probably line Pantoja at about like maybe minus 160, minus 190 or so. I don't know. It's I do definitely favor Pantoja quite a bit in this fight. The only issue is how he's going to defend against some of these takedowns, and if he's going to be able to keep this fight standing long enough for him to either put Royval out or do enough damage to win on the scorecards. And obviously how I've lined the fight here, I believe he should be able to do it for 2 rounds here. I think that first round is going to be Pantoja's. I think that when he's the most fresh, as long as he's not looking to jump guillotine, which, that's going to be a terrible idea. If he doesn't jump guillotine that first round, I think he could definitely keep it standing long enough to win that first round pretty clearly. That second round, I think, is when it starts getting a little bit dicey because, he's going to probably slow down a bit. Royval is going to continue to look for the grappling. And, I think that Pantoja should be able to win at least, or keep the fight standing for at least maybe 3 or 4 minutes, do enough there to win the second round. That third round might be a little more difficult for him, as he'll definitely look to slow down quite a bit more. And I see Roosevelt having a bit more success with the grappling that third round. But, as far as, submitting Pantoja goes, the guy's a very high level, black belt. So I don't think that Roosevelt's going to be able to sub him. But, with the pace he puts on, he might be able to just break Pantoja possibly. But, the guy has fought through fatigue really well, so I don't think that's very likely. So the pick here is going to be Pantoja for me. And, if this is a fight where they open the lines up like near a pick'em or Pantoja a slight favorite, I might put a bid on him. But, if Pantoja's too big of a favorite, I wouldn't lay the chalk on him, just because I feel that Roosevelt does have a path to victory with the grappling, and Pantoja's defensive grappling tendencies do open him up to potentially, give up rounds, against a solid offensive grappler. But, with that being said, I do give Pantoja a pretty significant advantage on the feet. I would actually not be surprised if Pantoja catches Royval and puts him out. Because like I said, Royval, he's a bit sloppy on the feet, and Pantoja is he's very quick and he has a lot of power. So I do think that the knockout is live here. But ultimately, the pick here is going to be Pantoja for me. I think he gets it done either by knockout or by decision. And in the main event, we have Kelvin Gastelum versus Jared Cannonier. And Cannonier's the minus 220 favorite. Comeback on Gastelum is plus 180. And, before I get any further, I do want to mention that I'm recording this section of the podcast quite early. And I do actually have a 1.5 unit bet placed on Gastelum already. This was actually locked in like late July. So if the line does shift, that's the reason why. I mean, I'm doing this podcast almost like 2.5, 3 weeks out. But, on Bet MMA Tips, I do have this locked in for quite a while, though. So hopefully when the podcast drops, the lines won't be too far off. But getting right into this matchup, I'll start with Cannonier first. So right off the bat, I do have to mention the guy's got very big power. And you'll probably hear that a lot throughout the week. And, it's not an exaggeration. I mean, if the guy's able to connect, it's pretty much lights out. And even if he doesn't connect, it'll make you really hesitant to engage just because you don't want to be taking too much damage from this guy. He's got very, very heavy leg kicks, and he was able to finish Silva with it, but, that was a much declined Silva regardless, so that was, still pretty impressive. And, he was having a bit of success against it, going to the legs against Whitaker as well. You could definitely see the welt start to develop on his leg, but, Whitaker did a really good job, fighting through that. However, as far as the striking of Cannonier goes, I think it is actually a bit rudimentary. I mean, it's not bad or anything, but he just does throw a lot of single strikes. I think that someone who could feint and mix it up well on the feet can give him a lot of trouble. Like, Whitaker did that really well, although you really can't take too much from that performance since, in my opinion, Whitaker is an elite athlete, and if it wasn't for Izzy, he'd be a pretty dominant champ. And for what it's worth, Whitaker dominated Gastelum as well too. As far as his takedown defense goes, it's not great, it's not terrible. It's just that with Cannonier, the guy's just really strong, really big, really hard to hold him down and control him. And there's been a number of fights where, in the grappling situations, he's able to stay safe, really make his opponents work, really wear them out, and then, he's able to finish them in like the second or third round. But overall, the guy is a very dangerous striker. His opponent, Gastelum, very solid striker as well. I'd say, he's got very slick boxing, very quick hands. He's got a good pressure striking sort of style, and, he had a very great performance against Izzy, but, it's starting to look like he may have peaked that fight, as hasn't really had, an opportunity to really replicate that performance. And, partially I think it's because he's got pretty subpar grappling, or rather, I think he's actually just so undersized, opponents are able to really just bully him in, the clinch or just grappling exchanges. And, the guy has got pretty unfavorable matchups in that regards as well, right? Because he got matched up with Hermanson, who's, a pretty solid wrestler. He got matched up against Souza as well, who, took him to a split decision there. And, Souza did have some success in the grappling as well. Chris Weidman. And, even guys like Darren Till, who's not really a grappler, was able to control him in the clinch for, prolonged periods. And, that's probably, I'd say, his biggest weakness in this division for Gastelum is really just the fact that he's severely undersized. And guys who aren't grapplers, or guys who even have a bit of grappling, are able to really have a lot of success there with him. However, against a pure striker like Adesanya, Gastelum did have a lot of success there, because that was a fight where it was pretty much just all standing, and Izzy really just obliged him there, and he was able to really get his hands going. But outside of that, I think a lot of opponents have really just gone to the grappling to really stifle the striking of Gastelum, just because the guy is just so undersized there. And in his most recent win against Heinisch, I actually went to faded Gastelum there, because I felt that Heinisch may have been able to go to his wrestling a little bit, but Gastelum was able to kind of flip the script there. He went to the wrestling and was able to win a pretty dominant decision. It was a very clear victory for him, and I think that was actually just more of like a levels fight than it was Gastelum showing he's an elite grappler or something. However, with all that said, though, I don't think that it'll matter too much for this matchup, since Cannonier's not really a grappler. He hasn't really shown to work in the clinch or even look to get takedowns or anything. The guy is primarily a striker, and if it is a striking match, I do think it's going to play out pretty closely. I think that honestly, the quickness and the speed of Gastelum will actually give Cannonier a lot of trouble. I do see Cannonier having a bit of success with the leg kicks. The guy hurts people with those leg kicks, man. He could definitely, maybe wobble Gastelum a little bit, but, he's going to telegraph those quite a bit. I think that Gastelum should be able to see them coming, maybe be able to check them or get out of the way. But I do see Cannonier being able to inevitably land a few and maybe just wobbling Gastelum a little bit. I definitely see Cannonier having a bit of success in the clinch if he decides to go there, as, Cannonier is going to have quite a bit of size on Gastelum. The guy's, fought at heavyweight, for Christ's sake, whereas Gastelum can, I think, very comfortably make 170 if he, well, I guess not comfortably, but, if he really pushed himself, he could definitely make 170. And, Cannonier is definitely going to be the bigger, stronger guy in there. And if he did look to tie up with Gastelum, I could see him having success. But again, I just have not seen that from him enough to be confident that he'll go there for this fight. And like I said before, if this is going to take place on the feet over the course of 5 rounds, I see this being pretty close to the point where I feel that, plus 180 on Gastelum is, a little bit egregious. I think that, at worst or at best, you can have Cannonier as maybe a slight favorite. But personally, I feel that, Gastelum should be the one that's slightly favored here. I think that, again, on the, in the striking exchanges, I do think that Gastelum, will be a little bit quicker in there, will likely be beating Cannonier to the punch. And, honestly, outside of the leg kicks, I just don't see Cannonier being able to do too much in the striking department. I don't think he'll be able to catch Gastelum. And, even if he is, Gastelum has proven to be, super durable. The guy's got a cast iron chin. And, I do want to mention with Cannonier, if you look at the fighters that he has beaten, he's primarily beaten grapplers and wrestlers, whereas guys who have good striking technique, guys who are a little more layered on the feet, have given him a lot of trouble. So just going over his record real quick, the guys he's beaten: Jack Hermansson, grappler. Again, this was a fight where Cannonier was able to kind of weather the early grappling of Hermansson and just come back in the second round and beat him. Same with David Branch. And then obviously he did beat Anderson Silva, but this was a very washed Anderson Silva, a Silva who who's had a pretty bad knee for quite a while, and he did just land those leg kicks and finish him that way. And then against guys with a bit of striking, guys who are, I'd say a bit more dangerous on the feet, like Whitaker, Reyes, and, even Blachowicz, who, obviously was able to get his grappling going, is a solid striker as well. They had a lot of success against Cannonier. So historically, I feel that Cannonier's really beaten guys that have, subpar striking, in my opinion, like Hermansson, Branch, Rorik, Kudalaba, Cyril Asker, all guys I feel are pretty subpar strikers and are primarily grapplers. Gastelum, in my opinion, doesn't really fall into this category. And, just because he doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to beat Cannonier. I just think that this is going to be a pretty close matchup, obviously to the point where I think it's worth a 1.5 unit stab at plus 180. So yeah, I honestly think that Gastelum will be having a decent amount of success on the feet. I think he'll be getting the better of Cannonier in a lot of the striking exchanges. Obviously, anytime that Cannonier lands, it's going to be pretty impactful. But just overall, I see Gastelum landing a little bit more, and this will be a 5-rounder. So Gastelum, he's been in the 4th, 5th rounds a couple of times, whereas with Cannonier, he's never gone past the 3rd round, and the guy generally is like a knockout guy. So this fight going into the later rounds could be a little dicey for him. He showed good cardio against that Whitaker fight, but Whitaker really paced him in that fight. But yeah, overall, I just feel that this being a 5-rounder, I think favors Gastelum a little bit more. And I wouldn't be completely surprised if Gastelum got the finish in the later rounds. Especially if he's having some success on the feet, as I don't think Cannonier would be able to take too much damage. He has been finished before, and I'm not saying he will, but ultimately, I just think this is a close fight. I think it's a lot closer than the odds suggest. And, I actually do slightly lean Gastelum here. So for me, the pick is going to be Gastelum, and I do have a 1.5 unit bet placed on him already. And that'll do it for this episode of the podcast. Shout out to anyone who's made it this far. I know this one's probably going to be a long one, and I know I say this every week, but this one definitely is probably going to take the cake, because that first episode, or the first half of this, was already like an hour or so, and then plus the second half is definitely going to probably break 2 hours. I wouldn't be completely surprised. I hope it doesn't put off too many people from watching this, but if they do, whatever. Anyways, I got to do a little bit of a plug, because I've been neglecting to do that these past few weeks. So yeah, if you found any of this information helpful or useful, just hit that like, hit that subscribe button. It's supposed to help out the channel. I hear this a lot, but the channel's been growing fucking slow as shit. So if anyone knows how to make a channel explode without me having to make a million different accounts, let me know, because I'll fucking do it. I'm desperate. But in all seriousness, if you guys did find any of this enjoyable, or if you found it useful at all, just hit that like, hit that subscribe. Also, give me a follow on Twitter. Much appreciated, guys. Thanks for hanging in there, and I'll catch you guys next week. Damn, so I have Bellator on here as I'm doing some of the recording and editing, and Stotts just beat Magomedov. And, this was something I was sitting on for a little bit, but, I've always felt that Magomedov was one of the more overrated fighters outside of the UFC. And, I'll probably catch a bit of flack for that, but, I'm not even saying the guy's bad or anything. He's really good, but I just feel that he is a bit overrated. But, that was a really good performance by Stotts, and man, that was actually a pretty good fight. But yeah, I had half a unit on Stotts. Pretty happy about that. But man, overall, what a crazy night.